everyone, it's Ashley from Sweet Dreams Bake Shop, and today I'm going to be talking about my top 10 items that maybe the baker in your life or maybe you need if you're just starting out baking and you need some essentials, or maybe you're looking to upgrade some of those essentials that you already have. Now, just a disclaimer, I am not sponsored by any of the companies that I'm going to be talking about today. However, I'm going to be leaving direct links down in the description box below where you can find these items. And they are affiliate links, so they will help the channel out at no extra cost to you. So let's get into it. The first thing on my list, and this is absolutely no surprise if you've ever watched any of my videos, is a KitchenAid. And I absolutely love the KitchenAid brand for many different things actually. I have a whole set of KitchenAid pots and pans that I use on a daily basis. I love it. It's good quality. It's easy to work with. But specifically, I am in love with all of the KitchenAid brand mixers. And I've used quite a few different models. And I often get a lot of people asking me which model they should get if they're thinking about getting a KitchenAid. I've honestly never used one that has failed me. Now, in terms of how to choose which KitchenAid mixer you should have, if you do a lot of baking and you do a lot of bulk baking, then I can say the biggest difference with all of the KitchenAid mixers is size. They have a version that is a mini version, but if you're actually looking to do a lot of stuff with your KitchenAid, I don't really suggest that one because it doesn't really have a huge capacity. But if you live in a small place and you only have room for something small, then the mini is the way to go. I personally own the classic. It's very, very simplistic. It just lifts on a hinge and then you've got your bowl in there. Now, the reason that I love KitchenAid mixers as opposed to any other brand, and yes, I have used other brands before, but I love the number of attachments that you can use for your KitchenAid. Now, I make a lot of homemade pastas from scratch, so I utilize that pasta attachment. But if you are not someone that makes your own homemade pasta or ramen, then it is super, super useful for fondant details as well. If you've ever seen shows like Cake Boss, for example, where they have a giant fondant sheeter, you're probably not going to be working with cakes that large. I really love using my pasta roller so that I can make thin fondant details. It works really, really well. And I don't always whip it out. You haven't really seen it in my videos, but when I'm doing very delicate fondant work that requires really, really thin things, I do use it, and I do use it often. I also love that they have other attachments like an ice cream maker, for example. In the summer, I make homemade ice cream all the time. So I love the versatility of a KitchenAid stand mixer. I love the look of the stand mixer. I love that it's not super bulky and it just looks really, really nice on your countertop. I literally never put my KitchenAid mixer away. I'm using it so often. So really, I just love having it out there. I also love that it comes in so many different colors. I think I have one that's pretty standard. Generally, when the color is a little bit more neutral, then the price is a little bit lower. But my dream is to own a pink KitchenAid. I would love a bubblegum pink KitchenAid, and one day maybe I will get a second KitchenAid. Oh, the other thing I want to mention as well is that your KitchenAid will work for a long time. I think for the most part, the life of the KitchenAid is pretty good. I have heard of people's KitchenAids breaking down every now and again, but those are people that are like continually using their KitchenAid every day. At the same time, however, I literally have been using my KitchenAid every day for at least the past, I think, 6 years, and it hasn't broken down yet. I don't even notice anything going wrong with the function of my KitchenAid at all. So I cannot say this enough. I really, really love my KitchenAid, and I think if you get one or you get somebody that is into baking one, they are going to use it for a very, very long time. The next essential is a good set of cake tools. Now, there are so many cake tools out there. So what constitutes a good set and what constitutes a not so good set? So if I were to go back in time and repurchase some cake tools, I think I would make sure that the cake tools that I was purchasing were metal. Now, the reason being, I do own plastic cake tools, but I really feel like metal cake tools, I can heat up. So if I'm working with something like modeling chocolate, I can heat my tool and then I can use that to create more depth with modeling chocolate specifically. If you are planning only on working with fondant and gum paste, then a plastic set is totally fine. But if you want that versatility, the metal set is going to do everything that the plastic set will do. So that's why I say metal set is the way to go. The next thing you're going to need is a good set of spatulas. And I think that you need a lot of spatulas, because if you're mixing a lot of different buttercreams or you're mixing a lot of different royal icings, then you're going to need spatulas. And I really wish that when I had started purchasing spatulas, which I kind of have a collection of because my friend and I have something called friendship spatulas. Anyway, it's something that we get each other anytime we see something really, really cool. And so we get these random spatulas. So I have some spatulas that I actually never use because the design is too pretty, and those designs do come off. So that's why I say for utilitarian purposes, I would definitely get heat-proof spatulas. I love my heat-proof spatulas because I can utilize them for anything. I can utilize them for the buttercream, but let's say my Italian meringue buttercream is curdling and I need to put it on a pot of boiling water for a little bit just so that it simmers nicely and so I can whip it back into its beautiful texture. Then I really love working with that heat-proof spatula. So kind of going back off of, yes, you can use plastic cake tools, but you might as well get the metal ones because it can do all the jobs of both. Same thing with the heat-proof spatula as well. A regular spatula will do just fine for most jobs, but if you want it to be versatile and able to use it for a lot of jobs, then I definitely suggest heat-proof spatulas. The next thing on my list, and I know this might not seem like an essential, especially because in past videos, I have said that it's not a must, but as I'm looking more and more at the things that I personally use on a fairly regular basis, this is definitely one of them. So an airbrush machine is definitely something that you need to look into. I've used multiple types of airbrush machines. I've used the one from Ink Edibles, which is great. The only time you're gonna run into problems with your airbrush machine is if you don't use airbrush colors. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. Some of you that are maybe more well-versed in baking might be thinking, hey, I've definitely used non-edible airbrush colors and it has worked for me just fine. And I have done that too. But the problem is if you don't get the consistency mixed down just correctly, you're going to end up clogging your machine and you are going to be so frustrated. So I think it's really, really important to use airbrush colors. Now, the reason that I say an airbrush is an essential and it's not just something nice to have is if you are starting a home baking business or a baking business storefront, you're going to get a lot of people requesting cakes and cookies and cupcakes that may not necessarily look like they're airbrushed, but they are. You can't achieve the same look using paint. Airbrush is very special because it gives a really nice finish. And I will say that, of course, you can definitely get by with just hand painting things, but I've just found that it's so much easier just to airbrush something really, really quickly. So that's why it is on this essentials list. And a segue coming in from that whole edible airbrush thing, you need your edible airbrush colors and you also need a good set of edible colorings. Now, if you are new to the cake decorating and cookie decorating world, we never, ever, ever use those liquid food colorings. I mean, you might in a pinch, especially if you're making pastel food colorings, but ever since I discovered gel food colorings, I have never, ever used those ever again. Now, I'm gonna be talking about AmeriColor here. AmeriColor is one of my favorite brands to use for coloring. The reason being, I just find that the color that's on the label is fairly true to what you end up with. I also like that it doesn't get a grainy texture at all when you're mixing those colors in. I do find some brands get a little bit grainy and it doesn't look quite right. Another brand that I also really love is Chef Master. Both of these brands are great. I will say though that I personally feel like AmeriColor reigns a little bit more supreme only because their black is truly black. And what I mean by that is sometimes when I use the Chef Master Black and I put in just a little bit, I get a slight amount of a purple tinge. So sometimes I have to counteract that with a little bit of yellow. I find the AmeriColor a very, very pure black. So when I put in just a little bit, it's still nice and gray. And you're gonna find this with different brands, that different brands do different things. Now, in terms of being able to work with all of these color brands and being able to bring up the colors that I need to for particular cookies or things that people are requesting, I can work with both brands. But I really think that AmeriColor just has a little bit of an edge when it comes to the black. The next thing on my list, if you are going to be getting into cakes or the person that you're shopping for is getting into cakes, they definitely need a metal bench scraper and a metal spatula. And one of the mistakes that I made when I first started making cakes was I didn't buy enough sizes. So you want to make sure that you have big long spatulas for those extra tall barrel cakes that people are going to be making possibly. And you also want to have the shorter one for when you're just doing a standard size cake. And you also want to make sure that you have different types of spatulas. So there's the types of spatulas that are long and they're just flat and there's no angle to them whatsoever. Those are really great. You also want to have the one where it is angled down, but it is still nice and flat. And then having one that has a little tapered edge is also really, really important, especially if they're going to get into buttercream work. Now, the reason that I'm putting this on an essentials list is because you don't want your tools to stop you from being able to achieve the things that you want to achieve with your cake. So having this is really important because these tools can do lots of different things and do lots of different styles. The next thing on my list is a rolling pin. And I know if you've watched my videos, you see that I use a rolling pin with handles. However, I actually suggest that you use a rolling pin without handles. Because what happens when you use one with handles is you're gonna get those lines when you're making really big sheets of fondant, or if you're making really big sheets of cookie, you're going to get some line in it and then you're gonna have to re-roll it out, you're gonna have to smooth it out. When you don't have one with handles, you're able to cover a lot more surface area. And like I said with spatulas, different sizing, super important. Same thing with rolling pins. So you do want to make sure that you have a nice long one for your fondant work, but you also want to make sure that you have a littler one too for smaller fondant details. And I will tell you, for years and years, I didn't use a smaller one. And honestly, I don't know why. Like, your cake table is going to get crowded. So having this giant, rolling pin as you're trying to roll things and it's knocking things over. So honestly, having the smaller one is a must. This one might seem a little bit silly, but for the longest time, I tried to get by with these gloves that would actually burn me. So make sure that you have gloves and oven mitts that can actually withstand super, super high temperatures. If you are into making macarons, for example, you're gonna be using heavy duty pans that are super, super hot. Mine, when they come out of the oven, if I were to even touch it even 10 minutes after, it's going to burn me. So you really wanna make sure that you invest in gloves that actually protect you from the heat. And I know that sounds silly, but I think a lot of us kind of limp along with what we have because it works. But I really think that getting good oven mitts is super, super important. The next thing I think you should purchase this Christmas season for somebody that's starting out with baking and maybe doesn't have a lot is a cake turntable. And I've talked about how important cake turntables are. I'm going to link the exact same one that I use because I absolutely love my cake turntable. I don't think it's the most beautiful. I don't think it's the most classy looking, but it's the one that I don't have to add anything to in order to make it work. There are a lot of those silver, beautiful cake turntables that look a lot more professional, but you have to end up putting a mat on top or tape or something to prevent everything from slipping. So I just love that the Wilton brand nailed it, and you can just have it and it's just ready to go, and everything is really, really nice with it. And if you're afraid that it can't withstand a lot of weight, you've seen my cakes. I've put, you know, 6-tiered cakes on there. I've put 5-tiered cakes on there, and it still can withstand and turn things really, really easily for me. I love it. It has lasted me a really, really long time. I think it is a great investment. And the final item, whether you're making cookies or cakes, you always want to invest in a good set of tips. And you always want to have a bunch of different types of tips. And I say, don't go and buy them individually. I bought my tips individually over time. I really should have just invested in a one-shot deal, whole tip kit. Now, you don't need to have any fancy containers, because as I've told you before, the fancy containers don't really work that well, because what if you have more tips than that? I actually prefer a square or rectangle container, I should say, with lots of different compartments. That way you can put the same tips in all of those compartments, and it's really easy to see which tips that you need. But when you're starting out, you're probably only gonna have one of each type of tip anyway. So go ahead, buy the whole package, I say, and make sure that you have a good selection. Now, I am a tipless bag person now, so I don't suggest you get a lot of round tips. I think some round tips are good. My personal favorite is the number 2 tip. It's a hole that is small. It can do really nice fine details, but it's not so small like a number 1, which is really hard to work with because everything gets clogged really easily in a number 1. No matter how smooth things are, things still get clogged in that number 1 somehow. The other thing I think is really important is, of course, to have your classic 1M, which is a star tip. And I think it's really important to have a petal tip as well. So all of these different types of tips, buy them all at once. I'll put a kit down in the description box below that I think is most useful, that I think you're most readily going to use. Now, if you already have some of those tips and you're like, oh, I don't want to invest in a whole set of tips, honestly, as you go on in time, you are going to use multiple tips at once, the same tips, especially if you want to do different buttercream cakes and different buttercream designs, and maybe you're making a lot of different cakes or a lot of different cookies at once. So I hope that gave you some really, really great ideas of baking essentials that you need to gift to somebody or yourself. And if you're just starting out baking, honestly, these things that I have mentioned are things that I use on a daily basis. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you can be part of the Sweetie fam. Right now, I'm uploading daily, so make sure you hit that notification bell so you know when I upload. Also, be sure to comment, request, or ask a question. I love hearing from you guys. Bye!